welcome to Capitol Hill. And it's the day after the night before, and Australian authorities are assessing whether there are any security implications after US troops killed Osama bin Laden. The Attorney-General says there is no imminent threat of retaliation in Australia. But there are questions being asked about how Osama bin Laden could live in Pakistan, so close to the Pakistani capital, and whether that went unnoticed by officials. Behind those headlines, the Treasurer Wayne Swan is putting the fine details on the budget, which he'll bring down next week. I've been joined in Melbourne by Labor MP, Labor Senator David Feeny, and here in Canberra by Liberal MP Tony Smith. Welcome to you both.
Hi Lyndall, thanks for having me on the program.
David, you're Parliamentary Secretary for Defence. In defence terms, in military terms, this operation was a long time in the planning. To get Osama bin Laden, could it have gone any better?
Well, I guess it's obviously been a dramatic and very successful operation, and it was concluded without any loss of life amongst the US forces that carried out the mission, and that's obviously something we can all be very pleased about. As you say, it's a long time in the coming, but it's an important step forward in our war on terror, and I think it's an important step forward at a very interesting time for the Arab nations of North Africa and the Middle East, and obviously what's happening across the whole Middle Eastern region.
And the Prime Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister and the Defence Minister say it doesn't have any implications for an earlier withdrawal of troops for Afghanistan. The Prime Minister has pointed out that we're coming into what's generally called the fighting season. Is there a chance it could make the situation for Australian troops more difficult?
I think the understanding across the sort of strategic and intelligence community is that now is the time for us to keep the pressure on in Afghanistan. Obviously, the struggle against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda has had a very strong year, if you will. This has obviously been a period when the coalition forces in Afghanistan have made progress. The death of bin Laden obviously reinforces that. And I think increasingly the message is that change and prosperity is attained through people power and the construction of democracies and civil societies, not through jihadist extremism. It's good to see us making strong progress in that endeavour, an endeavour against a terrorist organisation that of course kills far more Muslims than anyone else, a terrorist organisation that has killed Australians. It's great to see progress, but we cannot imagine that now is a time for us to relent, nor is now a time for us to imagine the struggle is over.
Tony, is there any reason to consider an earlier withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan?
No, look, this has been a great step forward. It has been a long time. That's to be expected. I mean, we are coming up to the 10th anniversary of September 11 and the 9th anniversary later in the year of Bali as well. It's been a very difficult task. I agree with what David has had to say. It is a great step forward, but it's the end of bin Laden, but of course not the end of Al-Qaeda. And I think we look back 9 or 10 years ago, the government at the time, of which I was part, and the opposition said that this was going to be a long haul, and it will be. The war on terror will take a long time, but it's a great step forward. I agree with what David said about now's the time to keep the pressure on in Afghanistan, and it's great that there's some sense of justice for the families as well, those who lost loved ones on September 11 and in Bali, here in Australia and around the world. And I think the US forces, the US administration deserve congratulations, but what it does show is that we're making progress. We can make progress, and now's the time to stick with the mission in Afghanistan and not for us to construct, I think, barriers around accomplishing that very difficult job.
David, the Attorney-General was on News 24 earlier today saying that there are still threats, although not imminent ones, to Australia from terrorism in the region and from homegrown terrorism. Is there a risk that after the death of Osama bin Laden that the public may become a little complacent and think the regional terrorism threats have been resolved or are on their way to being resolved?
Well, I guess we're very keen to make sure that doesn't happen, Lyndall, and as you say, the threat level remains at medium, and that means that terrorist attacks in Australia are feasible. They're not probable, but they are feasible. We have to remember that now some 35 persons have been arrested in Australia on terrorism charges, so the domestic threat does exist, and we need Australians to understand that the signal success of yesterday in terms of the death of bin Laden does not mean that the threat here in Australia has disappeared. It hasn't. But as I say, the threat level has remained the same, a level which is really about vigilance.
Tony, are people right to be asking questions of Pakistan of how much any of its officials might have known about bin Laden's whereabouts? He was living relatively close to the capital, while there have been suggestions in some media that it was Pakistan officials who first spotted the courier who led to bin Laden. There are other questions about whether Pakistani officials knew of his whereabouts. Is it right to be asking those questions?
Well, I think David would agree, but most people would agree. We're finding out lots of information very quickly. It's only just over 24 hours since the news broke. But, of course, it's inconceivable that bin Laden was existing there without a massive support structure. As to who was involved in that, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from the international community over the coming days, but literally, I think as we're on air, there's developing news out of the Pakistan government itself, and I mean, I think we just need to assess these things, but I think David would agree that whilst there are no surprises, I suppose, in this business with the war on terror, that the compound and the location and the structure that was there meant that there was a significant support structure in place and had been for a period of time.
David, do you think that's the reality, the likelihood that bin Laden did have a support structure in place in Pakistan?
Well, we can be certain that he had a support structure in Pakistan. We've known that for a long time. The question is not whether there is a support structure for Islamic extremism in Pakistan. The question is what is the relationship between that structure and the state of Pakistan. And that is a question that has existed for a long time and will continue to exist. But I guess for our part, we obviously need to comprehend that the challenge in Afghanistan and Pakistan is a very significant one. So the situation in Pakistan has been fragile from time to time. It's an ally, and its democratic government is a partner in the struggle against terrorism. It isn't easy and it isn't always simple. But I think Tony and I are really singing from the same song sheet there in terms of the fact that notwithstanding the challenge of jihadist extremists in Pakistan, we need to continue to support the democratic government there in Pakistan and its efforts to combat a force which of course kills many thousands of Pakistanis every year.
David, if we can turn to a challenge of a different sort, the Treasurer will hand down his fourth budget next Tuesday. He says he's up to the task of selling what will be a complex economic story. Do you think he is?
Oh, well, certainly he is. This is Wayne Swan's fourth budget. He's actually said that this is his fourth budget, and in many ways it's the most complex and challenging budget. But in this pre-budget period, I think he's set out some markers. Today we, of course, discovered that interest rates have remained stable at 4.75%. That's good news for the economy. Wayne Swan's been talking about jobs and the importance of creating jobs and getting Australians into work. And I think the budget is obviously going to be a very challenging one for the government because, as we did with the GFC, we are managing a complex economy and a complex budget, and Wayne Swan is determined to manage it back into surplus. That won't be easy. That will mean there are hard decisions, difficult choices. But in this pre-budget period, I think that sort of landscape has been laid out for us by Wayne Swan, and he'll continue to do it.
Tony Smith, do you accept that the economic circumstances are more complex than the opposition may be painting them?
Oh, look, I think the main point here is not how Wayne Swan says he can sell the budget. I mean, his difficulty in selling each of his budgets has been that he's produced a bad product every time. Now, let's cut to the chase here. I mean, David knows, as a senator from Victoria, as he travels around, he knows what voters are thinking, and he knows what his colleagues are thinking, which is that in 3 short years, and as he said, this is Wayne Swan's fourth budget, he delivered his first back in 2008, the public have had a good look at him. and what they've seen is someone who they don't trust to deliver on his word. They see someone who they don't think is competent to administer programs. His budget policy's been littered with waste and ceiling bats, and we could go through all those programs. We'd run right up to 5 o'clock. And importantly, they also see someone as Treasurer who they think isn't competent and doesn't understand the day-to-day concerns they have. Now, this is
but is there also an impetus on the opposition too, which you've been calling for the government to get back into surplus, to pass any spending cuts the government may choose to use to get back into surplus?
We've identified spending cuts they should make. We've identified programs along the way that they've wasted. Now, look, the critical point's this. David knows. I mean, all right, he's got to do the job here on television. So he's very confident about Wayne Swan. They'll sell into. He didn't sound very confident.
Sounds like you're speaking for both of us, Tony.
He didn't sound. Well, I am. I'm trying to help you out, mate. I mean, he didn't sound very confident.
Tremendous, thank you.
What he knows is the public have just about given up on Wayne Swan. They know that when an opportunity comes along, he wastes it. When a difficult situation comes along, he makes it worse. And really, I mean, what voters are telling me is they are concerned when he breaks promises. They're concerned when he seeks to implement them, whichever way, because when he does, he mucks them up. And that's what this budget's going to do again, you can see.
Listen, I think what Tony's missing in all of that is that it's really just a pile of rhetoric which goes to the Liberal Party's only contribution to debate in this country, and that's no. And of course what Wayne Swan's doing, what the government is doing, is embarking on a serious policy conversation. There are choices to be made. This is a strong economy, but it's got challenges. The dollar is now at 110 cents US. That obviously brings challenges and opportunities. This is a government that's talking about jobs. It's talking about a two-speed economy. These are all big conversations we need to have, and we need to get on with having them. And if the Liberal Party's only real message here is character assassination on Wayne and saying he's not up to it and all of that nonsense, then ultimately they must fail. This is an economic team that got this country through the global financial crisis. This is a proven and experienced group of ministers, and Wayne Swan, of course, being principal amongst them. And I don't think there is a doubt about Wayne Swan's capabilities. He's proven himself again and again. I think there's a doubt about the quality of the political discourse in this country, and the Liberal Party are making no contribution to either that or to any substantive policy ideas. They don't have any ideas, Lyndall.
And just quickly, a final response, Tony?
Well, look, I mean, what David knows, what the public know, I mean, he can say all of that. Last year, in fact, almost a year ago today, just before the budget, Wayne Swan released we released all of the Henry Review and a small response, and brought forward the mining tax. This was a tax that was his idea, that shredded a Prime Minister. He paid no price for it as Treasurer. Now look, very clearly, when there's cost of living pressures, he'll add to them.
We believe that economic booms build the country as well as build individual company profits.
And I'm sorry, that's where we'll have to leave it. We've run out of time. Tony Smith and David Feeny, thanks very much for joining us.
I might give David a call and we'll keep talking.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Tony.
And on that note, thank you for joining us as well.